Okay, this is a review video on how to find a midpoint or find distance between 2 points. So midpoint is just what you would expect. It's the middle. Anytime we need to find the middle of something, or the average, or the mean, those all mean the same things, is we add the numbers together and divide by 2. That's the middle. Okay? So if you were asked about what's the midpoint of 8 and -2 on a number line, whenever I have just one point, I'm just on a regular number line, I would take 8 plus -2 divided by 2. And 8 plus -2 is 6, and 6 divided by 2 is 3. So the middle of those two numbers, if I graph them on the number line, -2 and 8, would be +3. That's what I'm finding with a midpoint. Now, when I have ordered pairs, then the midpoint is also going to be an ordered pair. But in this case, I simply find the middle of the x's and then the middle of the y's. Okay? So I just look at the x's, 3 and -4, and I write 3 plus -4 divided by 2. Well, 3 plus -4 is 1, -1. -1 divided by 2 is -1/2. 1 plus -1 is 0, and 0 divided by 2 is simply 0. So this is the midpoint of those two ordered pairs. Okay? Now, often the more complicated question we're going to get asked is, if I give you the midpoint, can you give me a missing endpoint? That's a little bit more complicated. And you can use that same formula, add the 2 and divide by 2 equals midpoint. Or you can think of what's really going on. What am I really finding out? So if I told you the midpoint of B and C is the point 6, 1, so that's the midpoint. B is at 3, -2, what is the other endpoint? So what I do is I kind of put them in order. If B is at 3, -2, and this is the middle, and this is my question mark, what am I looking for, right? So I say to myself in my x's, I went from 3 to 6. I did +3. So now from here at 6, I need to +3 to get to the other end. Because middle simply means I've gone halfway. And if halfway was +3, then the other half must also be +3. So I take that 6 and add 3, and I know for my x's, my end point is going to be 9. Now my y's, I started at -2 and I made my way to 1. So that was +3. From -2, -1, 0, 1. Okay, so I went up 3. Now, that's halfway. To make the other half, I have to go up 3 again, starting here. And 1 plus 3 gives me 4. So this is the missing endpoint if this is the midpoint. Okay, but first thing I did was I put them in order. One, endpoint, middle, endpoint. Okay, and then I determined how far I went. So here's another one. A midpoint is at 0, 1. Excuse me, 0, -1. One endpoint is at 4, -6. That's messy. This is a 0. Okay, so I say to myself, how far did I go to get from 4 to 0? And I'm thinking I went -4, didn't I? Okay, so if I have to go again to the other endpoint, I have to go from 0 and -4 again. So I know that this is going to have a -4, because 0 minus 4 is -4. Right? Let's do the same thing with the y's. I'm going from -6 to -1. Well, down here at -6 up to -1 is actually +5. Okay? So from the middle to get to the other part, I've only gone halfway. To finish, I have to do +5 again, because this is just the middle. Halfway, so -1 plus 5 is going to be +4. So this is my other endpoint. Okay? So make sure you understand those. Again, with these videos, it's important that you take any notes that are helpful to you, because you're going to have to answer these kinds of problems when you come in to retake a test or for tutoring or anything. Okay? So that's our discussion of midpoint. Distance seems to give students more trouble. We're going to talk about the basic idea of distance is how far is it between 2 points. So we always pretty much go to the end minus the beginning. But notice these absolute value symbols there. What that means is whatever answer you get, it's positive. So if I subtracted 2 numbers to find the distance and got -3, well, distance doesn't come in -3. I never drive -3 miles to get to a store, or you know, the distance between me and someone else is not going to be -3. There's always going to be a positive distance. So if you get a negative distance, change it to a positive, which is what those absolute value symbols mean. Okay? So if you were on a number line, it would be super easy. I started at 7 and I went to 10. My distance is 3. But when we get on a coordinate plane, it gets a little bit more complicated, especially if our distance is on a diagonal. If you have a distance that's on the straight, you can do it just like this and count them up. But when it's on the diagonal, we have to do something different. That's when we're going to bring in the Pythagorean theorem. Now, if you're used to using the distance formula, that's terrific. Look at that distance formula and see that you're really using a squared plus b squared equals c squared as the distance formula. So you can keep using it. But I'm going to describe the process using the Pythagorean theorem. So I've given myself a couple of points here, and I'm trying to find the distance between these 2 points. Okay? So the first thing I do is I sort of in my mind think of that length as the hypotenuse of a right triangle. It's my C. And I make a little x's here is going to be my A, and my y's is going to be my B, and I'm going to have a squared plus b squared is c squared. So how far is it between this point, this x and this x will be my A, and how far is it between this y and this y will be my B. Okay, so when you see that distance formula and they do x2 minus x1, that's what they're saying. How far is it between these two x's to make that my A? So I looked at this and I said, well, how far is it? It's negative 2 minus 2. Negative 2 minus 2 would be negative 4, but I take the positive anyway because it's distance, and I know that the distance between my x values, or my A, is 4. So I put a 4 right there and put a square sign. Now I look at my b's. I'm really in my b's going to do negative 1 minus 4, and that's negative 5, but again, distance becomes positive, so I have a 5 as how far I've gone up or down. I went from negative 1 up to 4, and that's 5 spaces up. So I put a 5 right here and square it. I have everything I need for a squared plus b squared equals c squared. So 4 squared is 16, 5 squared is 25. Now that they're squared, I can add them together, and I get 41. 41 equals c squared. Now, if you're using a calculator, you can simply take the square root of 41, because remember, the answer set here is squared, and I want my distance in regular numbers, not squared. But you can also estimate. What I did is I said, well, 6 squared is 36, and 7 squared is 49, and my number is in between those. Okay? And let's see, which one is it closer to? It's 36, it's 5 away from 36, and it's 7 away, so it's actually closer to 36. So I'm going to call it 6.4 is that distance. That length right there is 6.4 whatever units I had. So that's a point. Okay? That's the steps that we're going to take. Now, let's do a couple more. Stop this at any time and take notes. Go back and watch again. Okay? Take as much time as you need. Now, one of the problems we get is if you have these 3 points, or they'll give you a picture or not, we're going to do one without a picture and one with a picture, what would the perimeter be? So the first thing you think to yourself is the perimeter is side plus side plus side. Okay? So I know that. And I know the coordinates, but what I need is the lengths. Okay? In order to find the perimeter, I need the length of the first side plus the length of the second side plus the length of the third side. So that's what I'm looking for. Now, notice that some of my lengths are right on the axis. If they're on the axis, I'm going to say, well, look here. From 0, I went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So this length sideways is simply 6. And this side is 1, 2, 3, 4. So this is where I'm going to find my C. Okay? But because they asked about perimeter, I don't only want this side, I also want this side. So when I'm actually done, I'm going to write 4 plus 6 plus C equals the perimeter. I'm not there yet because I don't know what C is, but I want to make sure you understand how this problem is different than just finding the distance on C. The perimeter what makes me take the distance on C, but then go back and add in the others. So 6 squared plus 4 squared. 6 squared is 36. 4 squared is 16. 6 and 6 is 12. 3, 4, 5. Okay, now I'm going to go back and think again. 49 is 7 squared, so we could call this 7.2. It's very close to 49. So over here I have 4 plus 6 plus 7.2 equals my perimeter. 10. So my perimeter is 17.2. Okay, think about that. Look at it. Pause if you need to and think about each of the steps we took. We had 2 easy sides because they were on the axis, they were straight, and then 1 difficult side that we had to use Pythagorean theorem on. Okay? Now let's look at this next problem. A little bit different now. because they didn't give me a picture. That's not my problem. I'm going to draw the picture. Okay, so 0, 4. That's my first point. -2, 0. 4, 4. And 3, 0. Okay, so I have something that looks like it's not quite a parallelogram, but whatever it is doesn't really matter to me because I know how to find the perimeter. Perimeter is going to be this side plus this side plus this side plus this side. Now these I can tell right off the bat. See how they're on the straight? I went from 0 over to 4, so I know this guy is 4. And over here I went from -2 to 3. -2 to 3 is 5. So already I have the 5 plus the 4. What I don't know is those crazy diagonals. So for the diagonal, I'm going to make my a squared plus b squared equals c squared triangle. Notice I'm going to do it for each side. That is, I'm going to go like this. Whoops, come on. Okay? So from here, which was a 3, over to here, which was a 4, I only went one space. Where is it? These guys right here. From 3 to 4, I went one space. I was at 0 going up, and I went up to 4, so this one is a 4. So for this side right here, I need to write 1 squared plus 4 squared equals c squared. Okay? So I get 1 plus 16 equals c squared. 17 equals c squared. So 17 is going to be about 4.1. So this length right there, I'm going to write it in right over here, is 4.1. Stop for just a minute and think about the steps with that, because we're going to do it one more time. We're going to come over to this side, and now I'm going to make myself a little triangle. Okay, and this is my other C. We'll call it C2. And now I was at 0 and I went to -2. So this is 2 spaces over here. But I was at 0 and went to 4, so this one hasn't changed. Okay, so I have on this side 4 squared plus 2 squared equals c squared. Okay, 16 plus 4 equals c squared. And that's 20 equals c squared. And I'm halfway between 16 and 25, which are my two squares. So this side is about 4.5. We're going to add it over here. And now I just get to do some adding. 5 plus 4 is 9. 9 plus 4 is 13. 13 plus 4 is 17. 0.1 and 0.5 make 0.6. So there's my answer. Think about it. Think if you have any questions on that. I didn't need to do the Pythagorean theorem on these sides because they were straight and I could just count straight over from one to the other. But on the diagonals, I had to draw in my triangle and go through my process of finding the distance. Watch that again if you need to. Okay, let's look at a word problem, because you know word problems are your absolute favorite. Karen leaves her house at 12:03, at the point could be 12:03, and travels in a straight line towards school at 1:1. How far a drive is it? Well, we could do it without the graph, but why should we, right? I'm going to go over, a little bit farther. Like 12:03 would be right about here, and I'm going to write the point in, 12:03. And 1:1 is way over here, like that, 1:1. Okay, so if those were miles, we're going to figure out how far it is for Karen to go. So think of that as our triangle. Let me draw that triangle in a different color. We're going to go over this way, because the one we really want is that straight line drive. That's the one we really want to know. So this side is C. Okay, so I need to know how far up did she go. She went from 1 up to 3. So she went 2. And she went from 1 to 12. So this way is 11. 12 minus 1 is 11. 3 minus 1, yes, is 2. Okay? So I have to go 11 squared plus 2 squared equals c squared. 121 plus 4 equals c squared. 125 equals c squared. And if I put that in my calculator, I would find that that one is about 11.1 miles. Okay? Maybe 11.2, but be right there. Okay? That's how you'd solve. That would be the answer to the problem. Now, if her car breaks down halfway, what point would that be? Oh, wait a second. They're asking me for halfway. What am I